Hello, this is Karen Johnson. I'm coming to you on October 23rd, 2015 with another in our series of Proctors historical tapes. These are tapes which hope to preserve the history of Proctors, and we have with us today a very exciting guest, Justin Knudsen. I'm going to have to work on my tongue here for a minute. But,
oh, you got it.
Justin, who is the grant writer at Proctors and has a lot of interest in the theater. And so, Justin, I'm going to ask you first, you've been here how long?
About 3 years now.
And before that, what did you do?
I was a soda jerk. I worked at a diner. That's where Philip found me. He's very fond of ice cream.
This is very intriguing. Philip found you in a diner?
Yeah, that's right.
And he adopted you?
Yep.
Well, you've been here and you've made a world difference, for sure. You're writing grants like crazy and just getting the work out, and you've been very successful. So I thought we might start out by one of the projects that Proctors has undertaken that the public may not be as aware of as others, and that is our heating plant. And you have had to explain that to many people, so I hope maybe you would explain it so the public could understand more what we're doing with the district. It's called Marquee Power now, but it's a district heating plant.
Yep, I'd be happy to. Yeah, it was really an interesting thing to learn about because most theaters don't have one, and in fact, across the state, there are no other private non-campus-based district energy systems that we've been able to find. So oftentimes you'll see a college might have one or a hospital campus, but there's not very many other ones that are operating in downtown cities or in a place where they're serving multiple customers, not their own facilities. And the ones that do exist that serve multiple customers are usually like a local authority. Like there's one in Rochester, there's one in Jamestown, and those are municipal authorities. The district plant in general, it comes from a very ancient technology called distributed energy, and it's been around for hundreds of years. In fact, the earliest district heating system is actually still in operation in a commune in France, and it's a geothermal system where there's hot water from geothermal activity that the ancient Romans piped around their city to heat their homes during the colder months. So it's been around for a long time, and the basic idea is that there's a central location that generates heating and cooling, and then sends that energy out in a couple of different formats to other locations in the surrounding area. And years ago, they were more common. In this country, they were very popular in the early industrial age, where you had a lot of heavy industrial action, a lot of large factories that needed to produce electricity or heating and cooling for their own facilities, and then would pipe steam or hot or cold water to neighboring buildings. And so they used to be very common, and in New York City there's still a service, the Edison steam system, where they are transferring steam to different buildings from a central plant in order to heat those buildings. In Schenectady, what we have is a district heating and cooling system based on water. So Proctors generates hot water and cold water and sends them via underground pipes to a couple of different buildings. The big building across the street, the Center City Complex, and then a couple of buildings to our right and left. It serves most of the Proctors, and it serves the Parker Inn and the Hampton Inn and TransFinder. And there's a couple more buildings that are going to be coming online soon. And the basic idea is like a giant radiator system where if you've got an older home, like an old Victorian-style home, you probably have a boiler in the basement and you've got some old radiators, and they might be steam or hot water. But the boiler creates the hot water, it sends it up through pipes up to your house in various rooms, and then a radiator transfers that heat from the water or steam to the surrounding air. It's a heat transfer system. So that's what they have in most of the buildings that our customer buildings have a heat transfer, which is basically a giant radiator. It's a little bit more modern and efficient, and that plugs into a air air duct system. So it heats or cools the air surrounding it, and then fans blow that air throughout their building. But the energy itself comes from a central Proctors plant, which is around the back by the Hampton Inn parking lot. And we have these giant industrial machines that create heating, like a boiler system, and cooling, which is generated by what's called a centrifugal chiller. There's a couple different ways to create cooling, and most people might have what's called a DX system, which is like a rooftop air conditioner. What we have is a giant turbine that spins a type of coolant very, very fast, and the pressure and the agitation creates an intensely cold vortex, which then super chills water in the nearby vicinity and sends that water out via underground water pipes.
So what's the benefit to our customers of this?
Well, the benefit and the reason people used to do this years ago is because if you're nearby a factory, then you have a lot of excess heat that needs to go somewhere. And if you want to be really efficient, you can capture that heat and put it into the system, and you basically get free heat out of it. In our case, the benefit is to be able to provide ourselves and our neighbors with the thing that we really want in the summer and winter, which is hot and cold. And most people, especially if you live in a rural area, you have to do this. You have to manufacture your own hot and cold. So you buy a piece of equipment, you put it in your basement or outside and dig a trench, and you have to make hot or cold yourself. And along with that, not just the equipment purchase, but you got to purchase fuel, and you got to do the maintenance, and you got to keep your system going, your furnace or your air conditioning system, and that costs a lot of money. With our system, what we're able to do is to provide our customers with what they really want, which is that hot and cold. And that way they don't have to install their own boilers or air conditioners, and they don't have to do the maintenance and upkeep on it, and they don't have to replace it every 20 years or so.
And so this becomes, from Proctor's point of view, there's income coming in, and also Proctor's uses the heat for its own needs.
That's right.
And we have some projects that are kind of growing right now and being developed, where we're going to add Key Hall and the backstage. And
Yeah, there's an energy component to it as well. One of the things that a thermal system like ours would allow us to do is to generate electricity. And if you're generating electricity through a natural gas turbine, for example, there's going to be excess heat that is essentially wasted energy that's going to go off into the air. But if you have a thermal system, you can pipe that heat energy back into your hot or cold water loops. And you can use heat energy to create cooling through what's called an absorption chiller, which is basically, if you ever had an old camper that might have a gas-powered refrigerator, you light a little pilot light and you turn up a burner, and that burner creates cooling in that little refrigerator. You see them a lot in camper trailers. Mm-hmm. And it's a similar type thing where you take heat energy, waste heat energy, and you can put it in through a device and create cooling as a result of that. Or if you need the heat, you can take the excess heat energy from generating electricity and put that into your heating system. So there's ways of utilizing the excess thermal energy that would otherwise just go into the atmosphere and be completely wasted, and put it back into something useful that would lower the cost of heating or cooling. So that's what we have the opportunity to do here, and we actually have 4 natural gas-powered microturbines that, for various reasons, we haven't been able to turn them on yet.
that's a whole show in itself.
That's a whole show in itself. But we're working through it, and we've got some really interesting, creative ways to solve that problem with different engineering and new types of very smart switches, basically. The grid, the electrical grid in New York State is changing, and we're trying to come up with different ways to understand what the future of energy is going to be like, and how different people who want to, let's say, install a rooftop unit to generate some electricity at their home can input power back into the grid. And there's a lot of questions about how to do that and what's possible and what's not. And the utilities and the state of New York and the Public Service Commission are all jockeying around trying to figure out what that means. But what that means for us is that we have an opportunity to turn these microturbines on and make our system even more efficient. So the building across the street, not only do they save construction costs by not having to spend $1 million on boilers and air conditioning system, but they're also going to get a lot cheaper power, where it's a super efficient system that is going to lower their costs for heating and cooling
And
year-round.
if there's a big disaster of some kind, these individual power generators hopefully would still go while maybe the grid was down in a certain area.
That's one of the things we're working on now, is trying to figure out the best way to configure the system so that, in the event that we would lose power, we'd be able to, at the very least, keep critical life systems going, and also to provide shelter or emergency services in the event of a natural disaster. As part of our what we're exploring, the feasibility of a community-wide microgrid. And what does that mean? And the state of New York doesn't know. The utilities don't really know, because they're new concepts and they need to be fully thought out and explored in terms of feasibility. So that's one of the other projects we're working on, trying to figure out how can we generate enough power to be helpful in the event of an emergency.
And knowing Philip, he's right up there on the policy side of that as much as he can be, I'm sure.
Absolutely. It's a very complicated question. A couple of years ago, the Public Service Commission initiated a series of hearings called the REV proceedings, which stands for Reforming the Energy Vision. And basically it's asking some pretty tough questions of the utilities, particularly about the issues and concerns engineering-wise with generating electricity back into the network. And out of that is going to eventually come some new regulations and some new kind of concepts and engineering principles that we'll be able to apply statewide.
So we've made tours available of this facility for people who would find it interesting to go through.
Yeah, it's fun for engineering students to see how the slightly outside of the box type of thing, which very common worldwide, it's been very common in our past history, and more recently district energy systems just have kind of gone away for various reasons. But it's still a very viable and powerful concept, and so it's cool to bring in student groups and show them what we can do, and what we can do in a sort of collaborative way, because that's, I think, what makes our system particularly special is, Union College has a similar type of system, but they're serving themselves, which is great. It's good for them, and it lowers their energy costs, makes them more sustainable. But for us, it's also about helping our neighbors. So, 10 years ago, when there was a lot of vacant buildings downtown, and there were old buildings that lacked any facilities, and they needed to be, redeveloped or restored, one of the extra costs associated with working on an old building is you got to fix the boiler or replace it, and you got to do something with those old radiators, and you need to provide heating and cooling for that building year-round to make it really usable in order to make someone want to move into there. Mm-hmm. And our system has helped to make that possible by avoiding those early construction costs. You can run a pipe through a ground and put in a heat exchanger unit, and then pipe that heating and cooling all throughout your building through whatever system you already have, whether it's a radiator system or if it's a forced air.
Now, the way we talk about this, it sounds so enormous, and you've already mentioned that you can see it from the Hampton Inn. Well, the staff can enter it from the area between the men and women's restroom in the back of the theater, so it's right next to us, and it's all fitted in and just tucked in there. And what it looks like from the outside is a wall of windows, stairs, and that's what you see. You don't really see boilers from the outside, but
it's just
they're in there.
It's a pretty unassuming structure. It's 3 stories, and it's when you actually go in there, I mean, these giant industrial machines are just large lumps, basically, lumps of iron with a lot of pipes going to them. So it's not necessarily even apparent if you're even standing in front of it exactly what it does. So that's been an interesting thing I've had a chance to learn, is standing next to one of these things and talking to our plant manager, what does this thing actually do? And it's kind of cool to see where this is, standing in front of this lump of iron, and to see that's where all the heat for just about the whole downtown block comes from. And it's also where the heat for the snow melt system on the sidewalks comes from as well.
Right. And is the snow melt completely around the block right now?
Yeah, it's just about everywhere around the block. There's maybe a couple of sections where it doesn't reach, but it's pretty comprehensive around the whole block.
Well, in Schenectady, that's quite a treat in the winter to have a pathway you can walk on.
It really is helpful. I mean, the snow melt system, it's not going to just zap all your snow away in an instant. It'll do it over the course of time. It takes a lot to heat up the sidewalk slab, but it does make it a lot easier to remove whatever snow is there and to make sure there's no ice there, which is nice. And particularly for, with so many patrons, having an ice-free sidewalk is really important. And it could also save a little bit of time and effort, and a little bit of road salt too. And that keeps the sidewalk more pristine for longer, because the road salt eventually erodes it away.
Yeah, this is a pretty impressive project, and I think I'm glad people would, they would like to know about it. You've written a lot of grants, obviously, and in the middle of your being here, I would say the New York State grant picture has shifted quite a bit to different ways of presenting grants and more competition among grants. But we've always had, for example, very strong funding from the New York State Department of Parks. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about some of the projects that you've written on parks grants?
Well, the historic preservation projects are really exciting, and I've enjoyed particularly learning about the energy side of things, but the historic preservation side is very interesting as well. It's kind of an amazing story. I come from a small community about 20 miles west of here, and years ago they had about a dozen different theaters, and they're all gone now. And the late 1970s, the last one was standing, and it was slated for demolition, and the wrecking ball was going to come, and there was a young woman who organized a protest, wanted to save that theater, the Rialto. And she made up signs and sandwich boards and went down and put flyers up everywhere and called all her friends to come down and protest the demolition of the last theater in town. And she showed up that day, and no one else showed up. She was the only person there. And the wrecking ball came and knocked it down, and it was gone forever. And once something like that is destroyed, you can never rebuild it. Even if you had billions of dollars, you can never really recreate it. And that story didn't happen here, which is why working here is so special, because it's a different story. It could have turned out a lot differently. And
that's right.
So it's pretty neat to research some of the history and to learn about different preservation techniques and ways to restore, like the decorative elements like the scagliola or the gold leaf, and to be able to help kind of complete that process, which has taken 40 years pretty much, from start to finish. Well, finish. It's never really finished. There's always ongoing maintenance and stuff, but this past summer we were able to do the final, put the final touches on the painting and redecorative elements, and restoring the scagliola and the gold leaf in the theater auditorium. So that's pretty exciting. The next step is the arcade, which the arcade's received a lot of work over the years, but it's never been fully restored to its original vision. And there's a lot of missing elements, a lot of small things that maybe people don't notice that are missing and detract from the original intention, the original design of the space. Like the glass chandeliers in the arcade, there was a glass on the bottom of each of the chandeliers. And if you stand underneath the chandelier right now, you look up and you'll see some dusty old wires, some dusty old cloth-covered wires that are not in the best condition. But there was some type of like a stained glass underneath there, and I'm not sure exactly. I haven't found good photos of what that actually looked like yet. But
so if anyone who's watching has perhaps any photos of or knows where they are, you're looking for them.
That would
right?
be great, yeah. They've been gone for a number of years now, and the story that I heard was that vandals at some point had broken all the bottoms of the chandeliers. So yeah, we have been looking for documentation to help figure out if we get another grant for historic preservation, how to recreate what that chandelier bottom originally looked like. And it was probably like a stained glass or a milk glass, but we don't know for
So
certain.
you have no picture of it so
I have
far?
no picture. And I've looked through hundreds of pictures too, and it's so frustrating because, I mean, it's understandable if you've got a camera in any era of Proctors being in existence, you're probably going to want to take a picture of a person or something on the ground floor that you can see with your eye, but most people aren't going to point their camera up toward the ceiling and take a picture of the light.
If
So-
you'd lived in a different time, you would have, right?
Yeah, I would. I like to think I would have. But unfortunately, no one seems to have done that, which is a little bit annoying.
So far. But,
Yeah.
but maybe you'll find it.
I'm sure they're out there somewhere, yeah.
So there's another big project that has to do with the floor in the arcade.
Oh, the
Can you
floor,
talk about
yeah.
that?
Well, the floor is the floor is essentially untouched since the day it was created. There was a couple little patches we did a few years ago, but the floor is terrazzo, which it's cementatious terrazzo, which means that there's a base layer of cement, and on top of the cement, a mason will pour small little pebbles of a certain type of color and grade, and then shave the top of those pebbles off, and then polish them. And that's what creates that smooth kind of surface with the little round colored stones. And that's terrazzo. Also very ancient, been around forever. The original company that installed it in 1926 is still around, and they worked on the patching of a couple of the places where it had significantly deteriorated a few years ago. But now we're trying to figure out how we can really repair some of the larger cracks that are just settling in age over time, that eventually are going to cause the floor to erode even further.
Some of the floor is getting kind of worn out and little dippy.
Yeah, partly, well, significantly because the terrazzo is cementatious. There's it's very hardy and resilient, but against road salt, nothing can stand. So people who are tracking in salt off their feet from the sidewalks over the years have eroded, particularly around the entrances, some of that terrazzo, and it's caused it to break up. And then there's some pretty significant cracks, and there is some engineering that needs to be done to alleviate the stress that is causing those cracks.
So you're like a detective.
Basically,
And
yeah, yeah. No,
why
that's,
not?
Yeah, which is fun. It gives me an opportunity to learn about different types of things. A year ago I didn't know what terrazzo was, so I have to learn about that. And for example, there are modern types of terrazzo. Terrazzo's actually used a lot in airports and big facilities like that, where you might want a decorative surface, but you want it to be a little more resilient than like linoleum. And so there are modern terrazzos, which are epoxy terrazzos. So it's the little pebbles of whatever color and grade that you desire, and it's set not in cement but in a resin epoxy, which is very firm, and you can polish it to whatever type of gloss or semi-gloss you want, and you can essentially replicate the original look and design of a terrazzo floor, but it's done in a material that won't erode from the salt.
Have you done any research on the stained glass windows at the top of the arcade?
I don't have, no, I haven't done a lot of research. I know that they were covered at one time, I think for the 1940s, to black them out, part of the sort of World War II blackout procedures. So they were painted for a long time, and at some point more recently they were uncovered again. I want to say that was for the expansion campaign, but I'm not certain.
Well, that may have been before, but
It might have been before, okay.
But there was a time when some lighting was put behind them.
Yeah, the lights are still there. So I think at one time the stained glass in the arcade was open to the elements, but
I don't know.
But over the years, it became enclosed in. There's another skylight that's above the stained glass. So the stained glass is not actually open to the air right now. It's covered under another more modern glass skylight. But the lights were installed, I want to say 30s or 40s, and they're still there, and they used to be turned on at night so that the stained glass would glow in the evening as people were walking in and out of the shows. But I think it's the wiring is pretty bad, and so they were decommissioned basically. So they're still there, and the wiring's still there, but the wiring had deteriorated significantly, so they've been turned off. And I think if we get one of our next grant for historic preservation that we've applied for, we're going to take care of those, and we're going to rewire those and put new LED lamps in, which would be also cooler. One of the things with stained glass is it doesn't respond well to extreme weather. So it doesn't like to be too hot. It doesn't like to be too cold, because the little lead strips, it'll separate from them over time. So to help preserve the stained glass and keep it safer over the long term, if we do install some new illumination, we'll do it with a lower temperature light, like an LED.
Do you have any idea how many grants you're writing a year?
Successful or unsuccessful?
Well, total.
I don't keep a running list. There's a lot of smaller grants, and there's a lot of grants we don't get, frankly. So it's keeping up the effort of getting the applications out is kind of an ongoing thing.
And you write grants also for Capitol Repertory Theater, which is part of the Proctors family. And I don't know about Universal Preservation Hall, whether we've gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, recently I've been doing a number of grants for Universal Preservation Hall, which is another really cool historic preservation project. So a lot of the similar issues that we had with Proctors. How do you, what philosophy do you use to restore a building? There's different ways. You can restore a building by coming up with a new use for it. You can restore it by essentially putting modern elements inside it and then using it for its original purpose. Or you can try to get it back to its original condition as it was when it was first built. What the theater auditorium is essentially trying to do is get back to the original condition. With Universal Preservation Hall, it's a little bit different because we're going to be using it for a slightly different purpose. It's a community arts center, which is going to have a lot of different things in it and a lot of different types of shows. So it's not going to be used as a church necessarily. So it's more like what we call adaptive reuse.
Now, just for the record, in 2014, Proctors entered into an agreement with UPH, which is in Saratoga.
Yeah, that's correct.
So many people may not be aware of that yet, but it's going to be an exciting part of our performing arts family. And
yeah, they're a cool story as well. Similar to Proctors in many respects. This is a beloved community structure. It was an old Methodist church originally, right around the corner from downtown Saratoga. It's on Washington Street, and it was used by the Methodists until the mid-1970s when they built a new church and vacated it. It was sold to a Baptist church, which didn't have the resources to maintain it over the years. It wasn't in good shape when they got it. And so it eventually was condemned by the city, and a group of community volunteers came in and said, we're not going to let this get knocked down. And they worked really hard and did some amazing feats of engineering, including these giant trusses in the middle of the Great Hall just to keep the roof from caving in. And they did a lot of work to stabilize the structure, and then now they're partnering with Proctors to help them get to the next level where they're going to finish the restoration, interior and exterior, and create a performing arts space in the Great Hall.
and then they're going to need their own historic videos.
Which is true. Yeah, that's someone's going to have to do it, tell that story, and preserve that for the long term.
Right. And it would be really important, and it would also be wonderful since they're starting some of this to document
Oh, absolutely.
the construction, because certainly when we were doing the work in the theater, the most amazing thing to me was learning how to make scagliola and doing a little gold leafing. And it's really, these are arts that professional people have to come in and really work on this and then be able to explain it. to people and do such a beautiful job. And I think sometimes when you're coming to the theater as a customer, you don't notice all the detail work that it takes to create the impression.
Yeah, it's true. You're focused on the stage, which is, I guess, where you should be. But yeah, there's a lot of detail that's not apparent to a cursory glance, and there's a whole world of craftsmanship and artistic choice, even in even in just laying a layer of paint. You're not just putting paint down. You have to make decisions about the color temperature, the finish, gloss or semi-gloss, and glazing, and there's other coatings that you would apply to bring out the nooks and crannies and things. That stuff that people like Jed Ellis, the head painter for Evergreen, could tell you all about the whole world of those artistic choices. But they're artistic choices, and they impact people, and they impact people, how people feel, which is the most amazing thing. I was a sociology minor in college, and learning how different groups of people interact with themselves and with their environments is a really profound examination, and it reveals a lot of things about people. And architecture, the purpose of architecture is to impact people and to affect how they feel, what they do, and what they don't do. And those artistic choices can impact how a person feels and impact their behavior.
Well, you've certainly had a varied experience, and whatever you said, you have gotten some pretty good grants.
We've done okay, but it's still a learning process, and it does help that we have some pretty interesting projects to talk about. One of the things with applying for grants is you have to be honest about what you can do, what you can't do, and in telling the story of Proctors, we've had challenges along the way, and being honest about those, and being honest about our intentions, is a really important way to tell our story from the ground up. So it's not just the story of what goes on stage, but it's also the story of where we were 20 years ago and struggling to keep the doors open, and where we are today and the challenges we face. The art of writing a grant is really about trying to tell this story in the most effective way possible, in the fewest words or the most expressive words possible, and it helps to have an interesting story to tell.
And I'm sure the people who read them appreciate the art that they receive. They're pretty boring to read.
They can be really boring. There's a lot of jargon. Yeah, people like to use a lot of jargon, and that gets bogged down. A lot of the state grants, until very recently, the online form, they couldn't support in their website line breaks. So the poor people who had to read these pages and pages of narrative didn't have any paragraphs to help them, through the answers to each question. And they've recently changed that, but that's just a simple paragraph is a beautiful thing sometimes. Just having a little white space in there.
To rest.
Exactly.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about in your world of grants?
Well,
a favorite you've written, or?
The thing that I like about writing the grants is it gives me a chance to be a little nosy. So it's an opportunity to ask people questions and poke around and maybe show up at a meeting that I wouldn't usually get a chance to show up at. So just that aspect has been really interesting, learning about new types of processes or learning about different aspects of the theater and our operations. It's been pretty interesting. Recently, we just got a grant from the Broadway League to do an education program in conjunction with Motown the Musical, which is coming up pretty soon. And we're working with students at the Wildwood School. So it's students who are on the autistic spectrum who have some pretty significant struggles in their lives. And we're working with them to provide a professional choreographer to do sort of a dance presentation for themselves and their families and the general public, and it's going to be based on the music of Motown. So they're going to learn a little bit about the history of Motown, they're going to learn a little bit about the history of dance, they're going to choreograph their own moves inspired by that process, and along the way, it's going to be a cool thing for the kids, and it's going to be a lot of fun for everybody, but it's also an opportunity for proctors to learn a little bit more about the needs of of people on the autism spectrum, and working with that group of people and getting a little bit of staff training along the way is going to help us do a better job to serve our audience. So that's one of the things that's pretty exciting. It's a new project, but it's a project that benefits somebody else and also gives us a chance to learn something. And every time we engage in a new little world, a new little venture of some sort, we get a chance to learn something too. And I think that's the special thing about Proctors, is that because we're involved in energy, we're involved in economic development for various things. We have the Downtown Ambassadors program, which is really cool, and we do all of these education programs. We're in a lot of different worlds at once, and like a person who has a lot of different skills and in various disciplines, it helps create like synapses in the brain that allow you to be better at another thing. So learning a few more skills in one avenue, maybe a construction avenue, might help you in another world, like an education program world. Maybe counterintuitively, but all those things cross-pollinate.
Plus, you make a lot of new partnerships in the community in doing all these things.
Yeah, just getting to know people is sometimes the hardest thing. I see a lot of creative placemaking projects around the country that are, they want to do things kind of like Proctors. They want to use art to bring back their community and revitalize their community. But the way that you do that always starts with the people talking to each other.
That is a great thought. And so simple and so important, people forget.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, thank you very much, Justin, for being here with us today and talking about power and grants and history and so many things that you do and how you're learning. Kind of, you have to be like a fly on every meeting to see what's actually going on.
I do love meetings.
It's a detective job. But that's all right. Then you have to stay up all weekend and write grants, right?
It's worth it, though.
Good. Well, it is worth it the community is really benefiting, so
Yeah.
that's what the motivation is here.
Actually, I want to add one more thing, if I may.
Sure.
So I went to film school. So I was living in Los Angeles for a number of years, and my intention was to become a screenwriter. That's what I went to school for, really. And I met a lot of people who spent their entire lives writing sometimes really awesome things, scripts or books or movies, whatever, and they'd make a living doing it, but they'd never get the movie made. The movie would never get made, the show wouldn't get picked up, the book wouldn't get published. I found that was really frustrating. So the most interesting and coolest thing about working here is you can write something and sometimes it becomes real.
And not too long after you do it, when you really think about it.
Yeah, usually if it's a state grant, you have a deadline.
You have a deadline,
You have to
and
do it by a
then,
certain time.
then your attention turns to getting paid for the grant after you do it.
That's a whole other story, and I don't want to think about that.
That's okay, but you feel good. You have the grant and you're doing the program, and the other will take care of itself, hopefully.
And sometimes just applying for a grant is a way for an organization to think about things a little bit differently and to evaluate what they're doing and evaluate how to do something in the future. Sometimes just that process of sitting down and saying, well, what should we apply for and how, makes us a little bit sharper as well.
Well, your postscript was very well taken, and I think important for us to remember. So we are today on October 23rd, 2015, and thank you all for being with us today. Justin Knudsen, grant writer at Proctors, thank you.
Thanks.